Hello, Dr. Finan.
Hello, how are you, Mr. Fay?
Well, I just want to give you a heads up that I'll be leaving probably 20 minutes before the end of the at 3:40. So if I
Okay,
leave unexpectedly, it's not because I got offended about something.
okay. We have a few people that have to leave early, so we'll try. We're going to start in about 30 seconds,
All
and
right.
hopefully we can sufficiently cover our topics today. So thank you for the heads up.
Sure. Yeah.
And so with that, I'd like to begin today's meeting and welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us today. I do know that we have some time constraints today from a number of people, so I would like to be cognizant of that and appreciate everyone's attendance. So I would like to just give you an overview of today's agenda. We're going to talk about the 2022-23 proposed capital budget. We're going to talk about the 2023 proposed preliminary budget, and then our 2022-23 curriculum update that I think will shed some light on how we're going to start our next school year and some of the new initiatives that we'll be working with in curriculum, as well as you'll see what our proposed preliminary budget and our capital budget have in store for us. So without further ado, joining me today in the 2022-23 capital budget proposal that we will review with you is Mr. Ian Tyson, and many of you know Ian. He is a consultant that works with the Scranton School District. And so we'll start and give you an idea of where we are with our capital plans and our capital projects. So thank you, Ian, for joining me today.
I'll share my screen here so that we can see the slides for the capital plan.
That's perfect, Ian. Thank you. As many of you remember, because you've been loyal followers of our recovery plan, part of our recovery plan was, of course, to invest in our facilities. And if you recall, we have $300 million worth of needs in our facilities. We have been working on that, and I think this will show you how where we are in that whole process. It will also re-explain where we will be headed in the future. So I'd like to just give you a preview, and then Ian will take you through the rest of this. In the recovery plan, when we first met and talked about it, there were so many significant needs in the district, not the least of which were evidenced by our concerns over asbestos. If you recall, that wasn't that long ago, and the pandemic brought to light some of the issues with our indoor air quality and the need to upgrade our HVAC system. So we began to gather information about the facilities at the very beginning when the recovery plan first began, and we needed to gather more updated information. So we started to look at what we needed to do to our buildings, and we needed to look at what our resources would be. So we would have to identify those funds to begin investing in our buildings. In the next slide, you'll see that we began with hiring an owner's rep. Representative Services, and as you would know them by Dewey. They've been on many meetings, and they have also spoken at the board meeting. We began with a completion of a feasibility study in 2021, and we began at that point to have a 2021 capital plan. This would be the successor to that 2021 capital plan. We completed the feasibility study, as you know. We identified the high priority projects. Of that $300 million in needs for our facilities, $240 million of those needs were high priority. So we began with looking at those high priority, and that was wet, safe, and dry. How do we keep them dry to keep better air quality for our students? How do we keep them safe? And we'll be talking more about safety later today. And then we talked about what else we would need to keep them and hopefully modernize some of those facilities. So we began the design and bidding for 18 projects. And with this, I'll turn it over to Ian.
Thanks, Candace. So I think I just want to reiterate that there's a lot of good work that's happened over the past couple of years in putting together the feasibility study and then the first capital plan. The district was really just focusing on what was the most immediate needs. And now that you've addressed those and some of the unanticipated ones that came up with the capital needs from the pandemic, now this plan is looking at trying to make some strategic investments in your buildings. But before we jump into the plan, I just wanted to go over a couple of basics for everyone in case you aren't familiar with what is a capital plan, how does this differ from the district's general fund budget, and this is all information that we covered at the board meeting back in June, and has also been in both previous presentations and then also both versions of the capital plan, the 2021 and the 2022-3 capital plans. So a couple of big differences stand out between a general fund or an operating budget and a capital budget. So the first one is that your capital budget typically takes place over a number of years. And this is because these are high cost projects. So these are related to major renovations at buildings. You might be building expansions on a building, building a new facility, or even within existing facilities, doing projects like replacing HVAC systems or doing other major renovations can take a long time and take a lot of money to accomplish. So that's one reason why we use a capital budget for that. So these are long-term projects, high-cost projects, and they're easier to track in a separate budget rather than lumping them into your general fund budget. The other one is that, again, since these are high cost and take place over a number of years, all the money is not going to be spent all at once. So in like a $30 million renovation, like the one that's being considered and taking place for West Scranton Intermediate, not all that's going to get spent at once. It's going to be taking place over a number of years. And it's just, again, it's a little bit easier to track and maintain if you're keeping that in a separate capital budget. So the capital budget is really just an annual budget, taking into consideration the plans for either the current or the coming fiscal year. What we're looking at is the capital budget over multiple years. So just the term of art that they use is a capital improvement plan. So this takes the proposed budget for the coming planned year, and then just extends that out over a number of years. So again, the district has a lot of needs. That you have only limited capacity and limited funds, so you need to plan those out over the course of a number of years to accomplish that. So that's why we look at not only just the proposed budget for the coming year, but also multiple years into the future. And both of those, preparing a capital budget and a capital improvement plan, those are best practices that many high-performing school districts and high-performing governments use as part of their planning and management processes. So this is very good news that the Scranton School District has been preparing these over the past couple of years. Capital projects, again, these are items that are included in the capital budget, and that there is usually a policy that establishes which items get included into the capital budget. Like we mentioned previously, the district updated its capital eligibility policy to outline which projects are able to be covered by capital budget revenues. So again, these are larger projects. There's usually a dollar threshold that's attached to them, and then also a useful life threshold. So that would be how many years do you expect that either the asset, so if it's like a building or a building system like HVAC, or it could even be something like equipment that would stick around for a while, or even vehicles in some cases. So again, these are just some other ones that we've talked about. So the feasibility study, these are typical studies that school districts do to get a sense for what is the state of the buildings and the facilities that they own and maintain, what needs need to be invested into those buildings, And then occasionally there's also, investments that are included on top of that. So not just some of the warm, safe, and dry projects that Candace talked about. You might also have architectural studies about, program additions or changes to the program, such as like science labs or even one-off projects like the district's expansion of the STEM program at Scranton High School. Even though that wasn't included in the feasibility study, that is a major capital project that we'll talk about with the proposed capital budget for the coming year. And lastly, again, these are best practices that other school districts follow and are recommended by finance professional organizations from around the country. So this is a good way for Scranton to plan for these major needs for the future. This can help you plan out what are the projects that you need to tackle, how much funds do you need to set aside to accomplish them, and then where are those funds going to come from? Are they going to come from local budget support, whether that's a transfer from the general fund? Are they going to come from bonds? Or are they going to come from grants or other sources? So for the proposed 2022-3 capital plan, this is a slightly revised version from the one that was presented to the board back in June. There are a couple of changes that I'll just go through here as I summarize what's in the capital plan. So starting off at the top, we have projects that are going to take place across the district's buildings. So these are either projects with multiple sites that are included in them, or just general services that are going to take place to support the district's buildings. So there is not really a clear way that we could break these out that would be easily digestible at an individual building level. So if you go into the 2022-3 capital plan, we'll have details about which buildings are being included in each of these projects. But for now, we're just we're showing those as a district-wide project to easily show and talk about them. So the first one that we have are abatement projects. So like Candace said, some of the asbestos abatement, the most major needs have been accomplished over the past year. So this is just the continuation of those projects over the next several years. In 2022, we have the proposed projects that were reviewed by Dewey earlier in the year, and then placeholder amounts for future projects based on the last AHERA management report that the district had completed in last school year. We also have some building ventilation projects taking place that would be under the ATC upgrades. That's going to help the district manage its HVAC and ventilation systems, and then upgrades to the buildings for things like chillers and other major projects. We also have some outward-facing improvements that are taking place, either masonry on the exterior of the buildings, paving, and then another big one that's been discussed in the district over the past couple of weeks. There's money set aside for security and life safety upgrades. So this will be everything from a couple of the higher priority security items that were identified in the feasibility study, and then also equipment. So these aren't tied to specific ideas yet. It was mostly just to include an amount for the district to plan around. So that way, as you figure out what your priorities are over the course of the last couple of weeks and then into the future, this is just to show that you have money set aside for, as you identify those priorities, you can start to allocate those funds. Then as we get down further into it, we have some major projects that are taking place at individual buildings. So these are either projects that are going to have a specific theme to them. So some of them, like the roofing projects, we've shown as one line there. And then others, like the Neil Armstrong HVAC renovations that are taking place over the course of this summer and a little bit into next year, we have those shown as separate lines. So we talked about two of the big ones right there. There's also plans to do a similar renovation at Robert Morris Elementary School. So if you'll recall from some of the previous discussions from Dewey, Neil Armstrong is sort of the template that the district is trying to establish for addressing projects across all the buildings. So rather than doing smaller district-wide projects and chipping away here and there at some of the upgrades across all the buildings, where it makes sense financially, and then also logistically, the district is trying to tackle the majority of the renovations at one time. So even though this is HVAC renovations, there's also a couple of other things that are attached to that at Neil Armstrong, and then also for Robert Morris. Then we have a couple of minor projects that are taking place at other buildings. And then the other large one that's taking place over the next several years is the West Scranton Intermediate School project. So this would be the modular units, the expansion of the 5th grade, and then also the other renovations that were discussed by Dewey back in May. So overall, $21.8 million in district-wide projects, $74.6 million of site projects, for a total of $96.5 million of work going into the district's buildings over the next 3 years. So like Dr. Finan said, the feasibility study identified about $300 million of projects in the district's buildings. This is getting you a significant way there in terms of addressing them. Now, some things have changed since 2021, so I don't think it's a dollar for dollar comparison, you know, that the 96 million exactly translates as to everything off of the feasibility study. Some of those, like the STEM program, were outside of the feasibility study because they came afterwards. Other ones that, you know, we can't really control. So everyone knows that inflation has been extremely high over the course of the past year. So over the course of time, that $300 million that Dewey identified back in 2021, that'll grow over time, you know, as the cost of cement, building materials, labor rises over time. So in the end, if you look back over, I don't know if it took, just pulling this out of the air, 10 years to accomplish everything in that original feasibility study, dollar for dollar, it would be a little bit higher once you look back at the end versus what the original study showed. But this is all just to say that this is a major undertaking that the district has made over the past several years. So if you add in everything that you've done over the course of 2021 and the early part of 2022, you're probably looking at over $100 million of work that's going into your buildings by the end of 2024. Here we have just a summary of some of those funding sources. So the major one is the district's bonds that you issued back in 2020. Those are shown here in the Capital Projects Fund because we have those in hand already. The district has set aside some of its ESSER funds to take care of some of those projects. So in the original capital plan from 2021, there were 3 borrowings that were included in there. And because of the ESSER funds, because of the RACP grant, and because of you know, some general fund support that we have down here from this transfer, the district has been able to eliminate one of those borrowings. So you're able to to accomplish more with less borrowing under this capital plan compared to last year's. This is a side-by-side comparison for some of the differences between the two reports and the presentations that we've done over the past 2 years. So this version relies on much more up-to-date information. So we're using the 2021 feasibility study as the basis for this plan. And again, as I mentioned, even though the time frame is a little bit shorter here, 3 years compared to 6 years in the previous plan, you're accomplishing this with less borrowing, so 60 million versus 86 in the previous plan. And you're making use of a lot of different sources, so that way, you know, you reduce those interest and borrowing costs for the district. And then again, even though we're doing this over a short amount of time with less borrowing, we're actually putting more into the buildings under the 2022-3 capital plan compared to the last year capital improvement plan. So again, some of the highlights that we talked about: Robert Morris, that's going to be a major undertaking in the next couple of years, modeled off of Armstrong. You'll be addressing the remaining amounts in the district's latest AHERA report. You're making investments in the STEM program over the course of this summer and then completing those over the course of next summer. And then there's other major HVAC upgrades that are taking place across a lot of the district's buildings. I think one thing that I didn't mention while we were talking about that previously, HVAC tends to be one of the higher cost items for upgrading for upgrading school buildings. So this is good that you're using some of those grant funds to support those costs for some of these replacements. We talked a little bit about the safety projects. So again, these are just placeholder amounts as the district figures out what are its priorities for using those funds. But this is just to recognize this is an important need and probably just a starting place for making these investments into your buildings. For the West Scranton Intermediate School projects, Dewey presented the expanded scope at the May 31st meeting. And then as the district approves or considers those new contracts at the August 2nd meeting, if you go forward with those, that would give you the option of completely or addressing the majority of the needs at this building while you're going in there and you're making the alterations for the fifth graders. So you'd be handling the mechanical, the electrical, and the plumbing upgrades, as well as handling some of the programmatic areas like the classroom pods, and then also making some of the changes at the planetarium and in the library area at the center of the building. So there are some planned borrowings in here for the 2022-3 capital budget. Pat will probably be talking about those in front of board meetings over the course of the coming months as you start to prepare for those. But the thought is that Pat will be working with the district's financial advisor to find the most cost-effective way of doing that. Right now, we have this broken out into two separate borrowings, with $10 million taking place in the current year, just to take advantage of a lower cost bank loan that the district could do based on its financial performance for the current year. And because you didn't need to do a cash flow borrowing for the year, this would be a little bit less expensive than going out to a traditional bond. And then issuing bonds in the coming year. So as Pat and the board work with the district's financial advisor, you'll find the most cost-effective way of finding that $30 million of borrowing. But right now, we're showing that as the two-step process that we have in the capital plan. This is just a summary of those dates as you go forward. So in June, there was the vote on the design phase for the West Granton Intermediate School project. Next week, the board will be taking up the preliminary budget and the capital plan. And then as you move through into the fall, you'll talk about the financing with Pat and the financial advisor. And then as you prepare the budget for the 2023 calendar year, there'll be additional conversations about the borrowing and how that impacts the operating budget as you get into November and December. So that's all that I have here, Candace. Should we take questions or should we take those at the end?
I think we should take questions now. Ian, thank you. Does anyone have questions?
Just to thank you for connecting it with the ESSER funds. That was, I think, a real critical question. I appreciate Ian's comment about their expensive HVACs, expensive renovations, to be able to use those ESSER funds for that, I think is important for us.
Thank you, Mr. Fay. Thank you, Ian. I appreciate your review. This is also, this presentation we will send out to the board members who weren't able to make today's meeting today. And it also will complement the capital improvement plan that you will receive in your board packet this weekend. What I'd like to do at this point is just to have a conversation and a preload to the 2023 proposed preliminary budget. This budget is a focus on students and student safety. It is student-centered. It's about academics. It's about social, emotional development needs of students. It's about safety, and it's about security. The budget, you can find it on our website. It's multi-pages. I'll just give a little bit of a preview now. The revenues are $218,209,642. Our expenditures are $218,209,642. And that includes the transfer to the capital that Ian just talked to us about. It also includes a fund balance of $17,336,487. Let me tell you about this budget. We are very fortunate to have received major increases in our BEF, which is basic education funding, and our SEF, special education funding, from the 22-23 state budget. It was at a historical 10-year high growth rate. Our Ready to Learn block grant continues, as we're very pleased with that. There's something called level up funding. And the important part about level up funding is that funding does become part of the BEF. So it's really nice to have been the recipients of additional funds from level up. I would like to, though, address the additional positions that are part of this proposed preliminary budget. There's a Director of Safety and Security. There's a mental health program supervisor. There are 3 social workers. There are 2 guidance counselors, which would bring us to the NEIU 19 average per student. There's an assistant HR director. There's a school security officer who would be a district employee. There's one position that would be grant and communication staff member. We will be restructuring the federal programs department due to a resignation. Some of the increased costs of these positions, and as you know, the money in education is most of our funds, 85% of the funds are dedicated to salaries and benefits. So some of these increased costs of these positions that are proposed were offset by savings related to retirements and resignations. As people retire at a higher rate, there's some savings with hiring people at a lower rate. And not all those are at lower rates, but you'll see what happens over time with that. Some of the benefits, they're consistent with what the trends have been. So they're part of the proposed budget. We will also purchase services, and these services, and again, some of these services are directly to support the safety and security that is a major concern in the community to every parent and I'm sure every community member. Under purchase of services, we're going to have an additional 1 SRO, school resource officer. We will share those costs with the city. There's an addition of 20 SSOs for contracted services. Those are school security officers. We have about $17 million in facility upgrades. And again, those will be funded through ESSER. We have some increases in our cybersecurity costs due to the increases in our tuition rates. And then we have a new transportation contract. So we have increased costs that are reflected in the proposed preliminary budget. With regard to supplies and textbooks, as you know, we made the commitment to be a one-on-one district with Chromebooks. We will allocate about replace about 3,000 student Chromebooks. We are going to increase our general supply budget by 2.5%. Part of that is the inflationary costs that Ian referenced. We are adding $300,000 to address TV studios at each high school. And there's a CNC router that we will add to West Scranton High School for equity with Scranton High School. There's $1 million increase in curriculum. We will use that for social studies at the elementary level, and part of that will be funded through the available ESSER 3 remaining budget dollars. Under equipment, we have some money allocated for future vehicle replacement. We replace teacher laptops and active panels at a rate of about 35% per year. And this is our second year, so that those costs that are in there. We have added costs for Raptor, Vector, and Monday.com are part of our security and safety initiative. And excuse me, our debt service that we're looking at the 10 million in bank loans and the 20 million in bonds, that increased cost of $1.2 million is also included in the proposed preliminary budget. We do have some refunds for previous years that we need to continue to repay. One was a $270,000 repayment of BEF at one point in the past, and it was before I arrived in the district. The district made some errors in their BEF accounting, and we have to pay that back. And we're still paying that back over time. And there's Compression Polymers is a company that had their assessed valuation reduced, and we have to pay them $650,000. So all of that would be included in this proposed capital or proposed general fund budget. The capital project fund transfer of $6.3 million, primarily for the safety and security upgrades that Ian talked about, are also included in this proposed budget. There are some other items included in this budget, and that would be some set-asides for one is for the fourth installment of the retroactive payment for the SFT teachers contract and paraprofessional contract that was settled last year. There's a fourth payment that needs to be paid next July timeframe. So that would be part of this 23 budget. We also have some contractual increases for the 1201 32 BJs and some reserves for Act 93. And we'll be going into our bargaining with the 2023 with the SFT. So there are some reserves set aside. I would like to mention that this is a proposed preliminary budget. The board is the only group that will that has the right to vote on this. They will discuss everything that I mentioned and further items, I'm sure, in the next few months. Because we are a calendar year school budget, this budget must be passed by December 31st of 2022 to be in effect for January 1st of 2023. There will be also a discussion over the change from the BP business privilege mercantile tax to a payroll prep tax. That is also included in this budget, and that will be, again, discussed at the board level and decided upon. I do believe that the safety and security items that are included in this budget, that $6.3 million set aside, is a nice substantial amount of money to help improve the safety and security, not just with equipment, but with personnel that can help us with all the issues that we have been hearing from our staff that they need help with. So just give you a little bit of an overview. I know I believe our school superintendent is here. Missy, would you like to add anything to what I've said?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today. Doctor, I think you did a really good job. I think it's exciting times. The fact that we are able to restore some of the things that we feel, slowly but surely, we're starting to restore some of the things that we feel that our kids have lost. And most importantly, the need for the mental health need right now is greater than anything that we could have ever expected. So I think we're pretty fortunate with the money, thank our legislators, thank the governor for the additional funding and moving forward. Again, we have to keep in mind, and when you get money like this, you have to strategically look at it, but over time. You can't just take the money and, basically what do we need today that we need to address today? Safety and security, obviously we know that has to be, so I believe we did a pretty good job. There's always going to be more need, but I think right now this is a stepping stone to what our district needs as far as mental health for our kids, extra supports, student services for our kids, and the safety and security issues that we are facing in the district right now. So again, I'm excited. I think this is exciting times. Rather than taking away, I actually feel like we're able to provide in this budget some of the things that we've been talking about. And more importantly, the stakeholder input, we've been able to address some of those concerns. We are nowhere out of the woods with our financial situation. We have to continue to watch every penny, which we will do. But I feel pretty good about where we are, and looking back on the amount of work that we've done in our buildings, I feel that we're headed in the right direction.
Thank you, Superintendent McTiernan. I feel the same way. I think we've come a long way from when we just passed this recovery plan 3 years ago. I'd like to ask Anne Griebeck to present your overview of where you are with curriculum and the update, Ann. I remember arriving in the district and picking up a U.S. history book that was almost 40 years old. And I said, could this possibly be the book that we're using? And everyone told me yes. And we have come a long way from that point in time. And Ann has a 5-year plan that she will introduce to you today.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Good afternoon, everyone. I will be very brief. As you will see, I have only a few slides, which is uncommon for me. So I've tried to make this condensed and very easy to follow. So here are some updates regarding our curriculum and instruction moving forward. So in the very first column on the left, you'll see the different topics or content areas that either are currently completed or are in process. So there were a couple curriculum that needed to be updated, and the top 3 on the left are all finished. Our Latin curriculum, Latin 1 through 4, is completed. That will be presented to the board the end of August for their approval. The courses that we had talked about beginning for our seniors, which we're very excited about, and this will take our seniors and help educate them and prepare them to be either college or career ready, or help provide success in the workforce, were our technical math and our financial literacy courses. Those were completed this spring. And again, those will be presented as a motion for the board to approve at the August 29th meeting. And we also spent well over a year updating our ESL curriculum, which was also just completed the other day. That will also be pending board approval the end of August. The new topics that are on the agenda, that the status is either pending or soon to begin, our ELA and our math curriculum have been, they were written a few years ago, and the resources within that curriculum are from the current materials that we were using. We want our curriculum to be reflective of the standards and not necessarily a series or a textbook. So we're in the process now of updating the curriculum, so it continues to reflect the standards for the state of Pennsylvania, but we need to take out the old materials that were in there that we're no longer using. So K-12 ELA and math is currently being updated. That will be completed sometime early in the fall. We just began that work. German, we are in the process of starting that. We have someone that 1 or 2 people that are working on that. So that's in progress. 9th through 12th grade art. I didn't know there were so many arts at the secondary. There's general, specific, art 1, 2, 3. There's so many. And those folks have done an amazing job. We began working on that this year, and they said they need a few more days in the fall. So that will be finished as well. Social studies, as Dr. mentioned, our secondary folks were able to adopt a new social studies program, new materials last year with the reading and math. Elementary, we kind of pumped the brakes a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're set to begin this fall. We're getting a committee together. I'm in the process of getting folks to participate in this process. And we're going to start to look at samples, have the committee pilot some samples, see what they would like to use, and go through the whole RFP process of voting, and then getting that up and running for the fall of 23-24 for our K through 5th grade students, so that by the end of next year, K through 12 will all have new updated social studies material. So we're very excited about that. Science K-12, there are new standards and curriculum that needs to be implemented by July of 2025. Katona Miller and I are working on a timeline, which we already have a tentative timeline. The new standards are project-based learning. So instead of a textbook, the conversation will begin to develop between committee members on projects and the materials that are needed for kids to actually manipulate and create projects versus memorizing something from a textbook. That's the new shift. So the groundwork's beginning. We do have a timeline of slowly starting to write the curriculum in grade level pockets, bringing folks on board and putting extensive time in PD into training people. Because again, it's a paradigm shift based on projects versus memorizing textbook information. So that is going to take up a lot of our time in the coming year to 2 years. And hopefully the window is having this up and running and ready to be implemented for July 25, and we will make that happen. And finally, our STEM curriculum for the incoming 7th and 8th graders is done. It's approved. We're ready to go with that. But in preparing to add our new students for next year, Katona and I will be working on the new curriculum for grades 9 and 10, and we'll begin that this year. So on this particular slide, you can see the things that are completed, pending board approval, and in the middle part of the slide, the things that are currently in progress, and again, will eventually be pending board approval. My last slide, I promise, is kind of my roadmap that's been edited several times. Superintendent McTiernan, when she was in this position, this is something that she had shared with us, and we've revised it over the course of the last year and a half. And because some of the stages are multiples, instead of color coding one stage, if it's multiples, I just made it gray because we are kind of implementing and monitoring things at the same time. So you'll see for math and ELA, the curriculum is all new. The materials are all new. So we're technically doing stage 4 and 5 at the same time. We're implementing, but we're also monitoring and assessing how things are going. So the items that are gray are combinations of stages. And as you can see from the key on the left, stage 1 is the evaluation of the program. 2 is development and revising and update. Stage 3 is the initial implementation and review, and stage 4 full implementation, and stage 5 monitoring. And as I said, the combo stages are gray. I just finished updating the stages in June. This is subject to change. If things are relatively recently updated and they seem to be going well and we're successful with them, we just might repeat the stage 5 another year. But for right now, everything is sort of shifting from stage 1 through 5 with the different content areas on the left-hand column. And as promised, I said I would be short, and that is my last slide. So if anyone has any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out and ask. And I thank you for your time.
Any questions for Anne?
I'd just like to say, Anne, that the amount of work that has gone to systematize and bring in the new curriculum and to bring our kids up, because that's really, I know we spend $212 million in a year, but we're really the one measure of as our success is how well our kids are doing, how they're learning, and how they get a love of learning that'll carry them through life. I think the amount of work that you guys have done in the curriculum to get us into a position where our kids are headed for success with a good curriculum is amazing. And I applaud you very much, you and everybody involved, for the work you've done to systematize it, to get it going, and to cover so many areas in the 3 years of the plan.
Much appreciated, Director Hume. It's a team effort for sure.
And thank you for those comments. I think you can see that we work with plans. Anne has a 5-year curricular plan. We're talking about a capital improvement plan that's 3 to 5. We had it as a 6-year plan. We're making so much progress. We'll be updating that. I think it's really important it's important to have a plan so we know where we're going. And we know, as Superintendent McTiernan just said, we have a few dollars, but we need to spend them wisely. And that's really important, that we are continuously monitoring and adjusting and evaluating so we know that we're spending our money wisely. What I would like to say, and I know I have a few more minutes, I've asked Mr. Rucker to speak about a new technology that he was able to, thank you, Ann, by the way, that he was able to find and preview for himself. We're always looking at ways to do things more efficiently and effectively. And one of the concerns that we have with increasing safety and security is how do we get our students through things like metal detectors in a short period of time. When you have 1,000 or 1,200 or 800 or 900, depending on the size of the building, we don't have enough staff ourselves to manage all of the needs to protect them, both on the outside of the building while they're waiting to go through the metal detectors and on the inside. So, Mr. Rucker, would you like to just share with us a little bit, a brief about what you have seen and what you have brought to us recently?
Yes, ma'am. One of the issues we have with magnetometers that we're using in the schools now is even with a fully staffed, well-trained crew running these metal detectors, at most, you'll be able to get about 300 people per metal detector in an hour. So with the school like Scranton High School, you're looking at 1,200 students. It would take you using 4 machines, 1 hour to get them in. We have about a 15-minute window to get these students into the building. So to do that, to do dirty math would be, you need 16 fully functioning metal detectors with 4 people each that have been well trained and have done this for a while to get, 1,200 students into the building in 15 minutes. Technology was brought up and I found was called Evolve Technologies. What it is, it'll do process about 4,000 students per hour. And what the really amazing thing behind this was bags would be able to remain on the students. They'd be able to see everyday mundane items like cell phones, keys, money clips, ear pods. Those are things that don't have to come out of your pocket like you standard would with a metal detector. Belt buckles don't get picked up. But if you were to take even disassembled weapons and try to smuggle them in piece by piece, it would still pick up the individual pieces of those items and flag them. And it actually shows a picture and a video of the person with it's called a bounding box over top of where it was detected on that person. And it allows for a much faster screening process. It takes 2 to 4 people to process those 4,000 in 1 hour. So 4,000 an hour, 15 minutes, we can absolutely get 1,200 students in throughout the building. And we'd be able to say we 100% screen every student for weapons every day.
So we do have some challenges because of, we're still investigating the cost as you know, it's something relatively new. So we'll be working on that in the next few days. But those are the types of technology oriented items that we're looking at to help us with our safety and security. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Rucker?
Rob, what was that called? What was it called?
Evolve with no E. Evolve Technologies.
Oh,
I'll be
okay.
sending a link over to the board for their review shortly.
Oh, great. Thank you.
No problem.
Rob, how many would we need at each school?
I'm not sure he heard you.
I'm sorry, 1 per each school.
1 for each school. So all the students would come through the one entrance.
Yes, ma'am, on the secondary level.
Okay.
Would they have to be single file, or would they be able to come in 3 or 4 kids at a time?
It kind of funnels them in so where they're coming in single file, but you're just walking through. There's no, like, with the metal detector, people are stopping.
Right.
Get checked. They have to put their bags down. There's a lot more, empty your pockets and even then they're not flawless. Standard metal detector, things could get through anyway. So, there's a lot going into it.
Well, yeah, it's like the TSA.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like the TSA. It's like the airport.
Any other questions for today? I want to thank everyone for attending today. Please tune in or come visit us on August 2nd for our board meeting. As you can see, we have a lot to discuss. And of course, the proposed preliminary budget will be discussed in further detail at that time.